You won't believe what happened at the end of this story, but first, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming tales that'll touch your soul. Now, buckle up for a journey that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about fate, second chances, and the power of an unexpected hero. What would you do if you found a ticket that could change your life forever? For Max, a scruffy mutt roaming the streets of New York City, that question was about to become a reality in ways he could never have imagined. The rain poured down mercilessly on the bustling streets of Manhattan, turning the city into a glistening maze of neon reflections and hurried footsteps. Amidst the chaos, a small, bedraggled figure huddled in the shadow of a dumpster behind Le Bernardin, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Max, once a beloved pet, now a stray struggling to survive, watched with hungry eyes as patrons in designer clothes hurried in and out of the gleaming doors, oblivious to his existence. As the night wore on, exhaustion and hunger took their toll. Max's emaciated body trembled, his matted fur barely offering protection against the biting cold. Just when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, fate intervened in the most unexpected way. A sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the curb, and out stepped a man whose very presence seemed to command attention. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, he exuded an aura of power and wealth. This was Jerome Blackwell, tech mogul and one of New York's most enigmatic billionaires. As Blackwell strode towards the restaurant's entrance, something fluttered from his pocket. A small slip of paper that danced on the wind before settling near the dumpster where Max lay hidden. The billionaire, engaged in an intense phone conversation, didn't notice the loss and disappeared into the warmth of Le Bernardin. Curiosity piqued, Max cautiously approached the fallen paper. His keen nose detected an unusual scent. Not food, but something equally enticing. With gentle teeth, he picked up the slip, ready to retreat to his hiding spot when a booming voice shattered the relative quiet of the alley. "Hey, get out of here, you mangy mutts." The restaurant's back door had swung open, revealing an irate chef wielding a broom. "Go on, Scram. We don't need your kind around here." Heart pounding, Max bolted from the alley, the precious paper still clutched in his mouth. He ran without direction, driven by instinct and the lingering fear of human cruelty. Block after block passed in a blur of honking horns and startled pedestrians until, finally, exhaustion forced him to slow his pace. Panting heavily, Max found himself in a quiet residential area of the Upper East Side. The stark contrast between the opulent townhouses and his own pitiful state wasn't lost on him. As he caught his breath, the scrap of paper fell from his mouth, landing on the sidewalk. For the first time, Max got a good look at what he'd been carrying. The paper was covered in numbers and symbols he couldn't comprehend, but something about it felt important. A distant memory stirred, of his former owner excitedly checking similar slips of paper and talking about hitting it big. Whatever this was, Max sensed it mattered to the man who dropped it. In that moment, a choice presented itself. Max could leave the paper there on the sidewalk and continue his desperate search for food and shelter. Or he could try to return it to its owner, a daunting task for a stray dog in a city of millions. As he contemplated his options, a gust of wind threatened to carry the slip away. Without thinking, Max pounced, pinning it to the ground. Decision made, he picked it up once more and set off, nose to the ground, following the lingering scent of expensive cologne and power. The journey took him through parts of the city he'd never seen before. He trotted past glittering storefronts on Fifth Avenue, navigated the maze-like paths of Central Park, and even found himself momentarily lost in the chaos of Times Square. All the while, he clung to that small piece of paper, driven by an inexplicable sense of purpose. Hours passed, and the first light of dawn was breaking over the city when Max finally picked up a stronger trace of the scent he'd been following. It led him to a towering skyscraper that seemed to touch the clouds themselves. The building's glass facade reflected the early morning sun, nearly blinding him as he approached. But Max's victory was short-lived. A pair of stern-looking security guards stood at attention near the entrance, their eyes immediately locking onto the bedraggled dog. One of them stepped forward, hand outstretched as if to shoo him away. "Hold it right there, pup. This ain't no place for strays," the guard warned, his voice gruff but not unkind. Max whined softly, torn between his instinct to flee and his determination to complete his self-imposed mission. The paper in his mouth felt heavier than ever, a reminder of how far he'd come and what was at stake. Just then, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The same Rolls-Royce Max had seen the night before. His heart raced as he recognized the man stepping out. Jerome Blackwell, looking slightly disheveled after what had clearly been a long night. It was now or never. Gathering every ounce of courage he possessed, Max darted forward, slipping past the startled guards and racing towards Blackwell. Shouts erupted behind him, but he was focused solely on his goal. Blackwell turned at the commotion, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw the dirty, determined dog heading straight for him. For a split second, their gazes locked. The billionaire's look of confusion meeting Max's earnest, pleading eyes. And then, just as security was about to grab him, Max dropped the paper at Blackwell's feet and sat down, his tail giving a hesitant wag. The world seemed to hold its breath as Jerome Blackwell bent down to pick up the slip of paper. His expression shifted from annoyance to disbelief, then to something Max couldn't quite read. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My God, it's the ticket. But how?" The guards, who had caught up to Max, paused uncertainly. "Should we remove the dog, sir?" one asked. Blackwell held up a hand, silencing them. He crouched down, meeting Max at eye level. For a long moment, he simply stared at the bedraggled mutt who had against all odds returned something so valuable. "Who are you?" he murmured, more to himself than to Max, "and why would you do this?" As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over the city, neither man nor dog could have possibly imagined the extraordinary journey that was about to unfold, a tale of loyalty, second chances, and the unexpected ways our lives can change in an instant. But what exactly was on that ticket, and why did it matter so much to a man who seemed to have everything? The answer to that question would set in motion a chain of events that would not only change Max's life forever, but also challenge everything Jerome Blackwell thought he knew about wealth, compassion, and the true meaning of loyalty. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the bustling streets of Manhattan, Jerome Blackwell found himself in a situation he'd never anticipated. The world-renowned tech mogul, known for his shrewd business acumen and unflappable demeanor, was utterly perplexed by the scruffy dog sitting before him. "Sir?" One of the security guards tentatively broke the silence. "What would you like us to do?" Blackwell's piercing blue eyes never left Max as he slowly straightened up, the lottery ticket clutched tightly in his hand. "Cancel my meetings for the morning," he said, his voice taking on a tone of authority that brooked no argument. "And find me the nearest veterinary clinic." The guards exchanged bewildered glances, but knew better than to question their boss. As one of them hurried to make the necessary arrangements, Blackwell crouched down once more, this time extending a cautious hand towards Max. "Come on, boy," he said softly, a gentleness in his voice that would have shocked those who knew him only as the cutthroat CEO of Black Tech Industries. "Let's get you cleaned up and fed." Max, exhausted from his night-long odyssey, hesitated only for a moment before allowing Blackwell to scoop him up. As they settled into the plush leather interior of the Rolls-Royce, Max couldn't help but marvel at the turn of events. Just hours ago, he'd been scrounging for scraps behind a dumpster. Now, he was being cradled by one of the most powerful men in New York. The car glided smoothly through the morning traffic, a stark contrast to Max's usual experience of dodging vehicles on foot. Blackwell spent the ride alternating between making hushed phone calls and staring pensively at the dirty, matted ball of fur in his lap. "You've got no idea what you've done, do you?" he murmured during a lull between calls. Max tilted his head, causing Blackwell to chuckle softly. "No, I suppose you wouldn't. Before long, they arrived at an upscale veterinary clinic in the heart of the Upper East Side. The staff, clearly used to catering to the pets of New York's elite, barely batted an eye as the infamous Jerome Blackwell strode in carrying a bedraggled stray. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Max was gently but thoroughly examined, bathed, and treated for various minor ailments accumulated during his time on the streets. Through it all, Blackwell remained by his side, his presence a mixture of curiosity and an unfamiliar feeling that, had anyone dared to suggest it, might have been called concern. As a vet tech carefully trimmed away the last of Max's matted fur, revealing a handsome golden retriever mix underneath, Blackwell's phone buzzed insistently. With a sigh, he stepped out to take the call. "Jerome, where the hell are you?" The shrill voice of Clarissa Blackwell, his wife of 15 years, pierced through the phone speaker. "The board is in an uproar. There are rumors flying everywhere about some sort of financial crisis." "What's going on?" Blackwell pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling the beginnings of a headache. "Clarissa, calm down. Everything's under control. I'll be at the office soon to sort it all out. But the lottery ticket is safe," he interrupted, thanks to an unexpected intervention. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Clarissa spoke again, her voice was laced with suspicion. "Jerome, what aren't you telling me?" Before he could respond, a commotion from inside the examination room caught his attention. He turned to see Max, freshly groomed and looking like a new dog, bounding towards him with an energy that belied his recent ordeal. "I'll explain everything later," Blackwell said hurriedly into the phone. "I've got to go." He ended the call over Clarissa's protests, his attention fully captured by the transformed canine now sitting at his feet, tail wagging expectantly. For a moment, Jerome Blackwell, the man who prided himself on always being 10 steps ahead, found himself at a loss. What was he supposed to do now? He'd acted on impulse, something so out of character it was almost laughable. Yet as he looked down at Max, he felt a stirring of something he hadn't experienced in years, a genuine connection. "Well," he said, more to himself than to Max, "I suppose we'd better head to the office and face the music." The ride to Black Tech Industries headquarters was tense, with Blackwell fielding a constant stream of increasingly panicked calls from board members and executives. Max, sensing the shift in mood, remained quietly curled up on the seat beside him. As they pulled up to the imposing glass and steel structure that housed Blackwell's empire, a thought struck him. He turned to Max, a wry smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You know, for a mutt who probably can't even fetch a stick, you've managed to retrieve something worth $500 million. He shook his head in disbelief. "Let's see if you can work that magic in there." The lobby fell silent as Jerome Blackwell strode in, designer suit slightly rumpled, with a golden retriever trotting obediently at his heels. Whispers immediately erupted in their wake as they made their way to the express elevator. Mr. Blackwell, his assistant Sarah, greeted him as the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Her professional demeanor faltered only slightly at the sight of Max. "The board is waiting in the conference room. They're not happy." Blackwell nodded grimly. "I'd be surprised if they were. Come on, boy," he added to Max. Time to face the firing squad. The tension in the conference room was palpable as Blackwell entered, Max still by his side. A dozen pairs of eyes, ranging from confused to outright hostile, followed their progress to the head of the table. "Gentlemen, ladies," Blackwell began, his voice steady and commanding, "I apologize for the delay and thank you for your patience. I understand there have been some concerns." "Concerns?" Howard Reeves, the eldest board member, interrupted. "Jerome, there are rumors flying that you've lost the company's entire emergency fund on some half-baked investment scheme. We're talking about potential bankruptcy here." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Blackwell held up a hand, silencing them. "I assure you, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact," he paused, building the suspense, I'm about to announce the most significant windfall in the company's history." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the now crumpled lottery ticket. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a winning ticket worth $500 million. The room erupted into chaos. Questions flew from all directions, voices rising in a cacophony of disbelief and excitement. Through it all, Max sat quietly at Blackwell's feet, seemingly unperturbed by the commotion he'd inadvertently caused. As Blackwell fielded questions and began outlining plans for the unexpected windfall, he felt a subtle shift in the room's energy. The hostility was fading, replaced by a buzzing excitement. But amidst a growing optimism, one voice cut through the chatter, sharp and cold as ice. "And where, pray tell, did this miraculous ticket come from?" All eyes turned to Clarissa Blackwell, standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of skepticism and barely concealed anger. Jerome met his wife's gaze, acutely aware of the sudden tension her presence had introduced. He glanced down at Max, who looked back at him with those soulful eyes that had started this whole extraordinary chain of events. "Well," Blackwell said, a hint of challenge in his voice, "that's quite a story. And it all begins with this dog right here." The room fell silent once more, all attention now split between the powerful CEO, his clearly displeased wife, and the unassuming canine at the center of it all. In that moment, Jerome Blackwell realized that winning the lottery might just be the easy part of what was shaping up to be the most unpredictable day of his life. As Clarissa's eyes narrowed, fixing first on Max and then on her husband, the air in the room grew thick with unspoken questions and simmering tensions. What had started as a tale of unexpected fortune was quickly evolving into something far more complex. A story of loyalty, trust, and the unforeseen consequences of a simple act of kindness. But even as he prepared to explain the inexplicable, Jerome Blackwell couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Little did he know just how right he was, or how profoundly his life, and Max's, were about to change. As Jerome Blackwell stood there, ticket in hand and eyes fixed on the scraggly dog before him, the world around them seemed to fade away. The bustling New York streets, the curious onlookers, even the anxious security guards, all became background noise to the connection forming between Billionaire and Stray. "Sir," one of the guards tentatively broke the silence. "What would you like us to do?" Blackwell blinked, as if coming out of a trance. He straightened up, smoothing down his rumpled suit with one hand, while still clutching the ticket in the other. "Bring him inside," he said decisively, "and get someone from HR to call the best veterinarian in the city. I want this dog checked out immediately." The guards exchanged bewildered glances, but knew better than to question their boss. As they carefully approached Max, who was still sitting obediently at Blackwell's feet, the tech mogul added, "And for God's sake, be gentle with him. This little guy just saved me from a catastrophe." Max, sensing no threat from these humans, allowed himself to be led into the imposing skyscraper. The lobby of Blackwell Industries was a marvel of modern architecture, all sleek lines, polished marble, and soaring ceilings. Employees and visitors alike stopped in their tracks, mouths agape at the sight of a dirty stray being escorted through this temple of corporate success. Blackwell strode purposefully towards the executive elevators, motioning for the guards to follow with Max. As they waited for the lift, he knelt down once more, this time offering his hand for Max to sniff. "You're quite the hero, aren't you?" he murmured, a hint of wonder in his voice. "I don't know how you did it, but you've just changed everything." The elevator ride to the top floor was surreal. Max had never been in such a small, moving room before, and the sensation made him whimper softly. To everyone's surprise, Blackwell reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears, offering comfort. "Almost there, buddy. You're doing great." When the doors opened, they revealed a palatial office suite that took up the entire floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the Manhattan skyline, while priceless art adorned the walls. Blackwell's personal assistant, a sharp-dressed woman named Evelyn, nearly dropped her tablet at the sight of her boss leading a bedraggled dog into the immaculate space. Mr. Blackwell, what on earth? Evelyn, cancel all my meetings for the day, Blackwell interrupted. And get me Nathan on the phone immediately. As Evelyn scrambled to comply, Blackwell led Max to a plush area rug near his desk. Rest here for now, he said softly. You've earned it. While they waited for the veterinarian to arrive, Blackwell paced the length of his office, phone pressed to his ear. Max, exhausted from his night-long adventure, curled up on the rug, but kept his eyes trained on the man who had shown him unexpected kindness. Nathan, it's Jerome. Listen carefully. Blackwell's voice was tense with barely contained excitement. I've got the winning ticket. Yes, that one. No, I'm not joking. It's right here in my hand. There was a pause as he listened to the voice on the other end. I know the drawing isn't until tonight. That's why I need you to lock this down now. Use every legal maneuver in the book if you have to, but make sure this ticket is validated and secure before anyone else can claim it. Another pause. The prize? Nathan, we're talking about $1.5 billion. That's billion with a B. Blackwell's eyes darted to Max, his expression softening. And believe it or not, I owe it all to a stray dog. As Blackwell continued his conversation, delving into the legal intricacies of claiming such a massive lottery prize, Max's eyelids began to droop. The events of the past 12 hours caught up with him, and he drifted off into a deep sleep, feeling safe for the first time in months. He was awakened some time later by gentle hands examining him. The veterinarian, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, clucked sympathetically as she checked him over. Poor little guy's been through a lot, she said, addressing Blackwell, who hovered nearby. He's malnourished, has some minor infections, and could definitely use a good grooming, but overall, he's in surprisingly good shape considering what he's been through. Blackwell nodded, relief evident on his face. Do whatever's necessary to get him healthy. Price is no object. As the vet began administering fluids and antibiotics, Evelyn approached her boss with a concerned expression. Sir, your wife is on line 1. She sounded upset. A shadow crossed Blackwell's face. He glanced at Max, then back to his assistant. Tell her I'll call her back shortly. I need to handle this situation first. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The elevator dinged, and out stormed a statuesque blonde woman, her designer heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. Jerome, what is the meaning of this? I've been trying to reach you all morning. And now I hear rumors about you bringing some mangy mud into the office. Blackwell winced. Clarissa, darling, I can explain. Explain? Clarissa's voice rose an octave. Explain why you disappeared all night without a word? Why you're suddenly playing Dr. Dolittle instead of running your company? Or perhaps you'd like to explain this. She thrust her phone towards him, displaying a grainy photo clearly taken by a bystander outside the building. It showed Blackwell, crouched down in front of Max, an unusually soft expression on his face. It's already all over social media, Clarissa hissed. Do you have any idea what this looks like? For a moment, Blackwell was silent, his gaze moving from his irate wife to the small dog still being tended to by the vet. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. It looks like a man showing compassion to a creature in need. And quite frankly, Clarissa, I don't give a damn what anyone thinks about that. Clarissa reeled back as if slapped. Have you lost your mind? Jerome, we have a reputation to maintain. We can't be associated with strays. That stray just saved us from financial ruin, Blackwell retorted, his patience wearing thin. He pulled the lottery ticket from his pocket, holding it up for her to see. This dog returned our winning ticket. Without him, we'd be facing bankruptcy by the end of the month. The color drained from Clarissa's face as the implications sank in. She'd known about their recent financial troubles, bad investments, a failed product launch, and a costly legal battle had left Blackwell Industries teetering on the edge of collapse. The lottery had been a desperate last resort, one she'd mocked Jerome for even considering. You mean it's real? We won. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Blackwell nodded. $1.5 billion. This little guy is our savior, Clarissa. I intend to make sure he's treated as such. As if sensing he was a topic of conversation, Max lifted his head, his soulful eyes moving between the two humans. Despite his weakened state, there was an undeniable intelligence in his gaze, a silent plea for understanding and acceptance. Clarissa's expression hardened. Fine, the mutt saved us. Have him treated, give him a reward, whatever. But he's not staying, Jerome. You know I'm allergic to dogs. It's either him or me. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Blackwell's jaw clenched, a storm of emotions playing across his face. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a violent sneeze erupted from Clarissa, followed by another and another. Get that thing out of here, she managed between sneezes, her eyes watering and skin reddening by the second. The next few minutes were chaos. Clarissa was rushed out of the office, already calling her personal physician. The veterinarian hurriedly gathered her supplies, preparing to move Max to a safer location. And through it all, Jerome Blackwell stood frozen, the weight of an impossible decision bearing down on him. As Max was gently lifted onto a makeshift stretcher, his eyes locked once more with Blackwell's. In that moment, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and power, the billionaire felt a connection he couldn't explain, a loyalty and trust he'd rarely experienced in his cutthroat world of business. But the choice was clear. With a heavy heart, Blackwell nodded to the vet. Take him to the best animal hospital in the city. Spare no expense in his treatment. But after that, find him a good home. Somewhere he'll be loved and cared for. As Max was wheeled towards the elevator, Blackwell called out, his voice thick with emotion, "Thank you, boy. I won't forget what you've done." The doors closed, and Max disappeared from view. Blackwell turned to the window, staring out at the city sprawled before him. He'd won the lottery, saved his company, secured his future. So why did it feel like he'd just lost something infinitely more valuable? Little did he know, this was far from the end of his story with Max. In fact, it was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about loyalty, love, and what truly matters in life. As the sun climbed higher in the New York sky, casting long shadows across the city, one question lingered in the air. In a world where money talks, what is the true cost of compassion? The answer, as both Jerome Blackwell and Max were about to discover, would be higher and more rewarding than either could have ever imagined. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Jerome Blackwell. As news of his billion-dollar lottery win spread, the media frenzy was unprecedented. Financial analysts dissected every aspect of how this windfall would affect Blackwell Industries, while gossip columnists speculated wildly about how the notoriously stoic CEO would spend his newfound wealth. But through it all, one story seemed to capture the public's imagination more than any other. The tale of the stray dog who had returned the winning ticket. Dubbed lucky by the press, Max had become an overnight sensation. Blackwell found himself bombarded with questions about the dog at every turn. Mr. Blackwell, what became of the heroic stray? Any plans to adopt him yourself? How does it feel to owe your fortune to a four-legged friend? Each time, Blackwell would offer a tight smile and a rehearsed response about ensuring the dog was well cared for, before swiftly changing the subject. But in private moments, alone in his vast penthouse overlooking Central Park, he couldn't shake the image of those soulful eyes looking up at him, full of trust and loyalty. Meanwhile, across town at the luxurious animal hospital where Max was recuperating, a different drama was unfolding. Dr. Sarah Thompson, the veterinarian who had been overseeing Max's care, found herself growing increasingly attached to her canine patient. "You're quite the celebrity, aren't you?" she murmured one evening, scratching behind Max's ears as she checked his vitals. The golden retriever mix, now clean and well-fed, looked nothing like the scraggly stray who had first been brought in. His coat gleamed, his eyes were bright, and there was a bounce in his step that spoke of renewed health and spirit. Dr. Thompson sighed, glancing at the clock. It was well past closing time, but she found herself lingering, reluctant to leave Max alone for the night. "I don't know what Mr. Blackwell has planned for you," she said softly, "but I hope he realizes what a special boy you are." As if in response, Max let out a soft whine and rested his head on her lap. Dr. Thompson felt her heart melt a little more. Unbeknownst to either of them, at that very moment, Jerome Blackwell was engaged in a heated argument with his wife in their opulent living room. "I don't understand why you're being so stubborn about this, Jerome," Clarissa exclaimed, pacing back and forth across the imported Italian marble floor. "We've more than compensated that mutt. It's time to move on." Blackwell stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to his wife, staring out at the twinkling city lights. "His name is Max," he said quietly, "and he's not just some mutt to be discarded, Clarissa. He saved us." Clarissa let out an exasperated sigh. "Fine, Max then, but my point stands. We've donated millions to animal shelters in his name. We've set up a fund for stray animal care. What more could you possibly want to do?" Blackwell turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I want to bring him home." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Clarissa's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in anger. "Absolutely not," she hissed. "Have you forgotten about my allergies? Or do they suddenly not matter now that you're a billionaire?" "We have a 15,000 square foot penthouse," Clarissa, Blackwell countered, his voice rising slightly. "Surely we can find a way to accommodate both you and Max. This isn't about space, and you know it." Clarissa shot back. "It's about you suddenly deciding to upend our entire lives over some stray dog. What's next, Jerome? Will you be inviting all the homeless people of New York to live with us, too?" Blackwell's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. When he spoke again, his voice was low and controlled. "That stray dog showed more loyalty and integrity in one night than I've seen from most humans in a lifetime. He deserves better than to be shipped off to some stranger's home, no matter how well-vetted they might be." Clarissa stared at her husband, a mix of emotions playing across her face, anger, confusion, and something that might have been fear. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I don't even recognize you anymore." Blackwell's expression softened slightly. "Maybe I'm finally becoming the person I should have been all along," he said quietly. "Clarissa, winning that lottery, it's given us a chance to reassess what really matters. Can't you see that?" But Clarissa was already shaking her head, backing away towards a bedroom. "No, Jerome. What I see is that you're letting this dog come between us. Well, I won't stand for it. You have a choice to make. It's either me or the mutt. You can't have both." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Blackwell alone with his thoughts and the weight of an impossible decision. As dawn broke over New York City the next morning, two very different scenes were unfolding simultaneously. At the animal hospital, Dr. Sarah Thompson arrived early, her heart heavy with the knowledge that today was the day Max was scheduled to be released to his new adoptive family, a wealthy couple from Connecticut who had been rigorously vetted by Blackwell's team. "Hey there, handsome," she greeted Max, who bounded over to her with his tail wagging furiously. "Today's the big day. Are you ready for your new adventure?" Max tilted his head, his eyes seeming to search her face as if he understood the bittersweet nature of the moment. Dr. Thompson knelt down, wrapping her arms around the dog in a tight hug. "I'm going to miss you, buddy," she whispered, fighting back tears. Meanwhile, across town, Jerome Blackwell stood in his empty penthouse, a single suitcase at his feet. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the space that suddenly felt cold and lifeless. He pulled out his phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing a familiar number. "Evelyn, it's Jerome. I need you to cancel my meetings for the day. And contact my lawyers. Tell them to start drawing up divorce papers." There was a pause as he listened to his assistant's shocked response. "Yes, I'm sure," he said firmly. "And one more thing. Call the animal hospital Tell them I'm on my way to pick up Max personally. He's coming home with me." As he ended the call, Blackwell took one last look around the penthouse at the trappings of wealth and success that had defined his life for so long. Then, with a deep breath, he picked up his suitcase and walked out, closing the door behind him. In that moment, as the billionaire made his way down to the waiting car and the veterinarian prepared to say goodbye to her favorite patient, neither could have imagined the extraordinary chain of events that was about to unfold. A series of twists and turns that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the transformative power of a single act of kindness. The stage was set for a reunion that would not only change Jerome and Max's lives forever, but would ripple out to touch countless others in ways no one could have predicted. As the New York morning traffic swelled around them, carrying Blackwell towards his destiny, one thing was certain: this was only the beginning of their incredible journey together. The sleek black Bentley wound its way through the bustling New York streets, its occupant lost in thought. Jerome Blackwell, billionaire CEO turned overnight lottery winner, felt a strange mix of anticipation and trepidation as he approached the animal hospital. His decision to choose Max over his marriage of 15 years still felt surreal, like a dream he might wake up from at any moment. As the car pulled up to the curb, Blackwell took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He stepped out, nodding to his driver. "Wait here, Johnson. This shouldn't take long." The moment he entered the hospital, a hush fell over the reception area. Clients and staff alike stared in disbelief as the most talked-about man in New York strode purposefully towards the front desk. "I'm here for Max," he stated simply, his voice carrying authority that brooked no argument. The receptionist, a young woman who looked like she might faint at any moment, stammered out a response. Of course, Mr. Blackwell. Dr. Thompson is just finishing up his final checkup. If you'll follow me." As they made their way down the corridor, Blackwell could hear excited whispers trailing in his wake. He ignored them, focused solely on the task at hand. When they reached the examination room, the receptionist knocked tentatively. "Dr. Thompson, Mr. Blackwell is here for Max." The door swung open, revealing a startled-looking veterinarian and an even more surprised golden retriever mix. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as Max and Blackwell locked eyes. Then, with a joyful bark, Max bounded across the room, nearly knocking Blackwell over in his enthusiasm. The usually composed CO found himself on his knees, laughing as Max covered his face with eager licks. "Hey there, buddy," Blackwell chuckled, ruffling Max's fur. "Ready to go home?" Dr. Thompson watched the scene unfold with a mixture of confusion and growing concern. "Mr. Blackwell," she began cautiously, "I thought Max was being adopted by the Hendersons from Connecticut. They're scheduled to pick him up this afternoon." Blackwell stood, one hand still resting on Max's head. "There's been a change of plans, Dr. Thompson. Max will be coming home with me." The veterinarian's eyes widened. "But your wife's allergies?" The press release said. "My wife and I are no longer together," Blackwell interrupted, his tone making it clear he wouldn't elaborate further. "Now, if you could just get me the necessary paperwork, we'll be on our way." As Dr. Thompson hurried to gather the adoption forms, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. Over the past weeks, she had grown incredibly attached to Max, even entertaining thoughts of adopting him herself if his placement fell through. But how could she compete with a billionaire? Blackwell seemed to sense her inner turmoil. His expression softened slightly as he turned to her. "Dr. Thompson, I want to thank you for everything you've done for Max. Your care and dedication haven't gone unnoticed." She managed a small smile. "It was my pleasure, Mr. Blackwell. Max is special." "Indeed he is," Blackwell agreed, looking down at the dog who was now sitting contentedly at his feet. "Which is why I'd like to make you an offer." Dr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "I'm establishing a new charitable foundation," Blackwell continued, "focused on animal welfare and rescue efforts. We'll need a chief veterinary officer to oversee our medical programs and initiatives. someone with both expertise and heart. I can't think of anyone better suited for the role than you, Dr. Thompson. For a moment, Sarah Thompson was speechless. The opportunity Blackwell was offering was beyond anything she could have imagined. A chance to make a real difference on a scale she'd only dreamed of. I don't know what to say, she finally managed. Blackwell's lips quirked in a half-smile. Say yes, and call me Jerome. As they finalized the adoption paperwork, a plan began to take shape. The foundation would need a headquarters, staff, and a clear mission. But more than that, it would need a face, a symbol of hope and second chances. What do you think, Max? Blackwell asked as they prepared to leave. Ready to become the most famous rescue dog in America? Max's enthusiastic bark seemed answer enough. As they stepped out of the hospital, a crowd had gathered, alerted by social media to the billionaire's presence. Flashbulbs popped and reporters shouted questions, creating a cacophony of noise and light. For a moment, Max hesitated, overwhelmed by the commotion. But then he felt a reassuring hand on his back and looked up to see Blackwell smiling down at him. Together, the billionaire asked softly. Max wagged his tail in response, and side by side, man and dog faced the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Blackwell's voice rang out, silencing the clamor. I'd like you to meet the newest member of my family and the inspiration behind the Blackwell Max Foundation for Animal Welfare. The announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Reporters scrambled to be the first to break the story, while onlookers cheered and snapped photos. As they made their way to the waiting car, Blackwell couldn't help but marvel at the turn his life had taken. Just weeks ago, he had been a man solely focused on business, on numbers and profit margins. Now, here he was, embarking on a new adventure with a furry companion by his side. Once settled in the Bentley, Max curled up contentedly next to Blackwell, resting his head on the billionaire's lap. As they pulled away from the curb, Blackwell's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed Clarissa. For a moment, his finger hovered over the decline button. Then, with a deep breath, he answered. "Hello, Clarissa." Jerome, his soon-to-be ex-wife's voice was cold. "I see you've made your choice public. I hope you're prepared for the consequences." Blackwell glanced down at Max, peacefully dozing beside him. "I am," he replied calmly, "and I've never been more certain of anything in my life." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Clarissa spoke again, there was a hint of something almost like regret in her voice. "You've changed, Jerome. I hardly recognize you anymore. Maybe I'm finally becoming the person I was always meant to be," he replied softly. "Goodbye, Clarissa." As he ended the call, Blackwell felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. "Where to, sir?" Johnson asked from the front seat. Blackwell smiled, scratching behind Max's ears. "Home, Johnson. We're going home." As the Bentley merged into the bustling New York traffic, neither man nor dog could have predicted the incredible journey that lay ahead. From the boardrooms of Wall Street to the shelters of forgotten strays, their story was about to captivate a nation and change countless lives. For Jerome Blackwell and Max, this was just the beginning. The first chapter in an extraordinary tale of redemption, purpose, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Jerome Blackwell and his newfound canine companion. The announcement of the Blackwell Max Foundation had sent shockwaves through both the business world and animal welfare communities. Overnight, Jerome had gone from being seen as a ruthless corporate tycoon to a compassionate philanthropist, all thanks to the scruffy stray who had changed his life. As Jerome worked tirelessly to set up the foundation, Max became a constant presence by his side. The dog seemed to have an innate understanding of his new role, charming everyone he met with his soulful eyes and wagging tail. From board meetings to press conferences, Max was there, a living symbol of second chances and unconditional love. One crisp autumn morning, Jerome and Max found themselves in Central Park for what had become their daily ritual. An early morning walk before diving into the day's responsibilities. As they strolled along the winding paths, leaves crunching underfoot, Jerome couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed in such a short time. "You know, Max," he mused aloud, "a few months ago, I wouldn't have dreamed of being out here at this hour. I'd have been buried in spreadsheets and acquisitions reports." Max looked up at him, tail wagging as if in agreement. "Now look at us," Jerome continued with a chuckle, "planning dog parks and rescue initiatives. Life's funny that way, isn't it?" Their peaceful moment was interrupted by a commotion up ahead. A group of joggers had stopped, clustering around something on the ground. As Jerome and Max approached, they could hear worried voices and what sounded like whimpering. "Excuse me," Jerome called out, quickening his pace. "Is everything all right?" The joggers parted, revealing a small, trembling chihuahua huddled against a tree. The tiny dog was clearly terrified, its leg held at an awkward angle that suggested injury. Without hesitation, Max trotted forward, his body language calm and non-threatening. To everyone's amazement, the chihuahua stopped shaking, watching Max with wary curiosity. "He must have gotten away from his owner," one of the joggers explained. "We've been trying to catch him for the last 10 minutes, but he won't let anyone near." Jerome nodded, kneeling down slowly. "Max," he said softly, "think you can help our little friend here?" As if understanding the request, Max inched closer to the chihuahua, letting out a soft, reassuring whine. The smaller dog hesitated for a moment, then slowly, cautiously, limped towards Max. Jerome watched in awe as Max gently nuzzled the chihuahua, seeming to comfort it. Taking advantage of the moment, he carefully scooped up the injured dog. "We need to get him to a vet," Jerome announced, cradling the chihuahua against his chest. "Does anyone know if there's an animal hospital nearby?" One of the joggers, a young woman with bright red hair, stepped forward. "There's one about 3 blocks from here. I can show you the way if you'd like." Jerome nodded gratefully. "Lead on. Max, come." As they hurried through the park, the young woman introduced herself as Emily, a local artist and animal lover. "It's really amazing what you're doing with your foundation, Mr. Blackwell," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "You're changing so many lives, both animal and human." Jerome felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. "Thank you, Emily. But truthfully, it's Max who deserves the credit. He's the one who changed my life first." They arrived at the animal hospital, where the staff immediately sprang into action. As they waited for news on the Chihuahua's condition, Jerome found himself deep in conversation with Emily about the challenges facing urban animal welfare. The biggest issue is space, Emily explained passionately. So many abandoned or stray animals, but not enough shelters or foster homes to care for them all. Jerome nodded thoughtfully, his mind already whirring with possibilities. What if... He began, then paused, the seed of an idea taking root. What if we could create a network of temporary foster homes? People willing to take in animals for short periods while we find them permanent homes. Emily's eyes lit up. That could work, but you'd need a way to vet the foster families, provide supplies, coordinate medical care. All things a foundation could facilitate, Jerome finished, growing excited. We could create an app, streamline the whole process, make it easy for people to help, even if they can't commit to permanent adoption. As they continued to brainstorm, bouncing ideas back and forth, Jerome felt a familiar sense of exhilaration. The same feeling he used to get when closing a big deal or outmaneuvering a competitor. But this was different, better somehow. This wasn't about profit or power. It was about making a real difference in the world. Their discussion was interrupted by the return of the veterinarian, a kind-faced woman in her 50s. "Good news," she announced with a smile. "Our little friend here has a minor sprain, but no serious injuries. We've given him some pain medication and bandaged the leg. He should be fine in a few days." Jerome breathed a sigh of relief. "That's wonderful. But what about his owner? Has anyone come looking for him? The vet's expression turned somber. I'm afraid not. And he's not microchipped, given his condition. He's quite underweight and shows signs of neglect. I suspect he may have been abandoned. A heavy silence fell over the room. Jerome looked down at Max, who was sitting calmly by his side, then at the trembling Chihuahua on the examination table. In that moment, he made a decision. We'll take him, Jerome said firmly. At least until we can find him a proper home. That is, if it's all right with you, Max. Max's enthusiastic tail wag seemed to seal the deal. As they left the animal hospital, the Chihuahua, now dubbed Peanut, safely ensconced in a carrier, Jerome turned to Emily. How would you like to be part of something big? He asked. I think the Blackwell Max Foundation just found its new project manager for our Foster Network initiative. Emily's jaw dropped. Are you serious? Mr. Blackwell, I don't know what to say. Jerome grinned, a twinkle in his eye. Say yes, and call me Jerome, as they walked back through the park. Jerome with Peanut's carrier in one hand and Max's leash in the other, Emily chattering excitedly beside them about her ideas for the Foster Network. He felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. This, he realized, was what true success felt like. Not the cold satisfaction of a business victory, but the warm glow of knowing you were making the world a little bit better, one life at a time. As if reading his thoughts, Max looked up at him, those soulful eyes full of understanding and love. Jerome smiled down at his furry friend, marveling once again at the twist of fate that had brought them together. Well, boy, he said softly, looks like our little family just got a bit bigger. Ready for our next adventure? Max's joyful bark echoed through the park, a resounding yes to the journey that lay ahead. For Jerome Blackwell, former Cutthroat CEO turned animal welfare champion, it was clear that the best was yet to come. Little did he know, the universe had a few more surprises in store, challenges and triumphs that would test the limits of his newfound compassion and push the Blackwell Max Foundation to heights he never could have imagined. 6 months had passed since that fateful day in Central Park, and the Blackwell Max Foundation had grown beyond Jerome's wildest expectations. The Foster Network, spearheaded by Emily, had become a roaring success, with thousands of animals finding temporary homes while awaiting permanent adoption. Peanut, the Chihuahua they had rescued, had become the unofficial mascot of the program, his story inspiring countless others to open their homes to animals in need. But with success came new challenges. As Jerome sat in his office, poring over the latest reports, he couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something was missing. Max, ever attuned to his human's moods, patted over and rested his head on Jerome's knee. What do you think, buddy? Jerome mused, scratching behind Max's ears. We're doing good work, but it feels like we could be doing more. As if in answer to his question, there was a knock at the door. Emily poked her head in, her face alight with excitement. Jerome, you need to see this. She hurried in, tablet in hand, and pulled up a news article. The headline read, Crisis at Millbrook Animal Shelter. Hundreds of animals at risk as funding cuts loom. Jerome's brow furrowed as he skimmed the article. Millbrook was a small town upstate, and its animal shelter was facing closure due to budget cuts. Over 300 animals would be left without homes if a solution wasn't found quickly. This is terrible, Jerome muttered, a familiar fire kindling in his chest. We have to do something. Emily nodded eagerly. I thought you might say that. I've already got some ideas. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Jerome, Emily, and the entire foundation team worked around the clock, coordinating with local officials, rallying volunteers, and organizing a massive adoption event. Max was there every step of the way, his calm presence a source of comfort during the long, stressful days. The day of the event dawned bright and clear. Jerome stood at the entrance to the Millbrook Town Square, which had been transformed into a bustling adoption fair. Colorful banners proclaimed Operation forever home, while volunteers in Blackwell Max Foundation t-shirts bustled about, setting up booths and corralling excited animals. As people began to arrive, Jerome felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Dr. Sarah Thompson, the foundation's chief veterinary officer, looking concerned. "Jerome, we have a situation," she said, leading him towards one of the animal pens. Inside was a large, intimidating Rottweiler, growling at anyone who came near. "This is Zeus. He's been at the shelter for months. No one will adopt him because of his aggression issues." Jerome frowned, studying the dog. There was something in Zeus's eyes, not anger, but fear. It reminded him of the look he'd seen in Max's eyes that first night, when he was alone and scared on the streets. Without hesitation, Jerome opened the pen and stepped inside. The volunteers gasped, but he held up a hand to stop them from interfering. Slowly, carefully, he approached Zeus, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Hey there, big guy," he murmured. "I know you're scared, but you're safe now. No one's going to hurt you anymore." To everyone's amazement, Zeus's growl subsided. He regarded Jerome warily, then, inch by inch, began to relax. When Jerome finally reached out to pat his head, Zeus leaned into the touch, his tail giving a tentative wag. A cheer went up from the watching crowd. As Jerome led Zeus out of the pen, he was met by a sea of smiling faces and flashing cameras. The moment would later be described as the turning point of the event, a vivid demonstration of the Foundation's commitment to even the most challenging cases. As the day wore on, adoption after adoption was finalized. Families left with new furry members, their faces glowing with joy. Even Zeus found a home with a retired K9 handler who saw past his gruff exterior to the loyal companion within. By sunset, every single animal from the Millbrook shelter had been adopted or placed in a foster home. As the last of the volunteers packed up, Emily approached Jerome, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We did it," she said softly. "Every last one." Jerome nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He looked down at Max, who had stayed faithfully by his side throughout the long day. "We sure did, buddy. We sure did." As they prepared to leave, a commotion near the entrance caught their attention. An older woman was arguing with one of the volunteers, gesticulating wildly towards Max. "That's him. That's my Lucky." Jerome's heart sank as he approached the scene. The woman turned to him, her eyes wide with recognition and accusation. "You," she exclaimed, "you stole my dog." A hush fell over the remaining crowd. Jerome felt all eyes on him as he struggled to find the right words. But before he could speak, Max stepped forward, his tail wagging hesitantly as he sniffed the woman's outstretched hand. "Ma'am," Jerome said gently, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is Max. He was a stray when I found him over a year ago." The woman's face crumpled. "But he looks just like my Lucky. He ran away during a thunderstorm, and I've been searching ever since." Jerome's mind raced. Could it be possible? Had Max had a home all along? The thought of giving him up was almost unbearable. But if this was truly Max's original family? Just then, Dr. Thompson stepped forward. "I have an idea," she said, pulling out a small device. "This is a microchip scanner. If Max or Lucky was chipped, it'll tell us." The next few moments were tense as Sarah ran the scanner over Max's shoulder blades. When it beeped, everyone held their breath. Sarah's face broke into a smile. "There's a chip," she announced, "but it's one of ours. It was implanted when Max first came to the Foundation." The older woman's shoulders slumped in disappointment. I'm so sorry," she said, her voice quavering. "I really thought—" Jerome felt a wave of sympathy wash over him. "I understand," he said softly. "Losing a beloved pet is heartbreaking." An idea struck him. "Why don't you come with me? I think we might be able to help." He led the woman, whose name was Margaret, to where Zeus was waiting with his new owner. The big Rottweiler's tail started wagging as soon as he saw Jerome. "Zeus here needs a friend," Jerome explained. "Someone to visit him. Maybe take him for walks. His new dad works long hours, and I think having a loving grandma figure would do wonders for Zeus's confidence. What do you say?" Margaret's eyes lit up as she cautiously extended a hand to Zeus. The dog sniffed it, then gave it a gentle lick. "Oh my," she laughed, the first genuine smile crossing her face. "Aren't you a sweetheart?" As Jerome watched Margaret and Zeus bond, with Max sitting contentedly by his side, he felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. This was why he had started the foundation, not just to save animals, but to bring people together, to heal hearts and create connections. The sun was setting as they finally left Millbrook, casting a golden glow over the town. In the rear-view mirror, Jerome could see Margaret waving goodbye, Zeus's massive head resting happily on her lap. "Well, Max," Jerome said, reaching over to ruffle his faithful companion's fur, "looks like we've had quite a day. Ready to go home." Max's contented woof was all the answer he needed. As they drove back towards the city, Jerome reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a lonely billionaire focused only on the bottom line, to the head of a foundation changing lives across the country, all because of one brave, loyal stray who had seen the good in him when no one else did. The road ahead was still long, with challenges yet to face and battles yet to fight, but with Max by his side and a newfound purpose in his heart. Jerome Blackwell knew that together, they could overcome anything. For in the end, it wasn't about going from rags to riches or from the streets to a penthouse. It was about the transformative power of love, compassion, and second chances, a lesson that one remarkable dog had taught a billionaire, and that together, they were now teaching the world. As the New York skyline came into view, Jerome smiled. This wasn't the end of their story. In many ways, it was just a beginning.